On November 12, 1942, in the western desert of North Africa, a seized American automobile was left deserted near a demolished British supply convoy. Its operators had escaped once their location became indefensible. Standard Wehrmacht protocol stipulated its demolition or abandonment. However, the leader of the reconnaissance group had a different plan. He commanded, "Summon our most skilled mechanic. I need to ascertain if we can put this machine to use." What the Afrika Korps mechanics uncovered in the subsequent 30 minutes would call into question everything they held true about German preeminence. This understanding did not arrive like a flash of lightning, but rather as a gradually dawning comprehension that intensified with every part of the inspection. A small plaque on the dashboard indicated Willys MB. The Americans referred to it as a Jeep. The initial surprise occurred when they lifted the hood. The engine bay was pristine, engineered for swift upkeep by any individual possessing fundamental mechanical skills. It featured color-keyed wiring, distinctly marked components, and easily reachable parts accessible without the need for specialized equipment. In his 2 decades of maintaining German military vehicles, the head mechanic had never witnessed such considerate engineering for maintenance in the field. Every fastener was uniform. Each component looked to be a perfect match for those on any other vehicle of its kind, conceived for large-scale manufacturing and simple replacement. The Go Devil engine had a displacement of 134 cubic inches and generated 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. While not remarkable by German benchmarks, the design philosophy that underpinned it was groundbreaking. This engine was not constructed for perfection. It was made to be straightforward, dependable, and, most importantly, easy to manufacture. A mechanic with scant training could service this engine using basic tools, with no need for specialty wrenches or intricate protocols that demanded factory-certified technicians. The Americans had evidently engineered this vehicle with the expectation that farmhands and industrial laborers would have to service it in the midst of combat. By November of 1942, the divergence between American and German philosophies regarding military vehicles had grown quite apparent. The United States would manufacture more than 640,000 Jeeps over the course of the war. Germany would succeed in producing just over 50,000 Kübelwagens. Even more concerning was the implication of this gap. The Jeep was the epitome of American manufacturing ideology at its peak. Standardized, simplified, and engineered for mass production by workers with moderate skills using interchangeable parts. The officers drew near as the mechanics carried on with their examination. "Well, can we make use of it?" The head mechanic glanced up, selecting his words with care. "This vehicle is extraordinary. It was created by someone who comprehends battlefield conditions." One of the officers scowled. "German engineering is the most superior in the world." The mechanic chose not to contest the point. He merely indicated the four-wheel drive mechanism. "Observe this transfer case. A solitary lever activates four-wheel drive. One lever. Our Kübelwagen vehicles necessitate several steps, and the majority lack four-wheel drive entirely. The Wehrmacht's main light vehicle, the Volkswagen Type 82 Kübelwagen, was a superior machine in numerous ways. Ferdinand Porsche had engineered it with the characteristic German focus on detail. It was more lightweight than the Jeep, consumed less fuel, and its air-cooled engine negated the weakness of radiators to hostile fire. Yet it possessed a single, crucial flaw. It was exclusively rear-wheel drive. In the soft sands of North Africa, the mountains of Italy, and the mud of Russia, that constraint turned out to be catastrophic. The Jeep, in contrast, could direct power to all four of its wheels whenever required. The mechanism was so uncomplicated that a soldier with no formal education could learn to operate it in a matter of minutes. The mechanics proceeded with their inspection. The suspension employed basic leaf springs, which were unsophisticated next to the Kübelwagens' advanced torsion bars, but vastly simpler to mend in the field. The electrical system was elementary, yet durable. The fuel system was capable of operating on nearly any type of gasoline without needing adjustments. The most disconcerting aspect of all was the distribution of weight. The Jeep had a weight of roughly 2,450 pounds, whereas the Kübelwagen weighed 1,540 pounds, a disparity of 910 pounds. German engineers would have seen this extra weight as a defect, one that diminished performance and heightened fuel usage. But the mechanics perceived the logic within this seeming irrationality. That additional weight corresponded to robustness. The chassis was excessively reinforced, built to withstand abuse that would wreck lighter vehicles. The Americans had determined that dependability under harsh treatment was more important than peak efficiency. They had constructed a vehicle anticipating it would be handled improperly, overloaded, and exposed to circumstances no engineer would ever sanction, and they had engineered it to endure regardless. This was not the American ineptitude that Wehrmacht training documentaries had foretold. This was engineering centered on reality instead of theory. The unit transported the Jeep back to its forward base. For the next 3 days, mechanics performed comprehensive evaluations. They maneuvered it through soft sand where Kübelwagens often faltered. They burdened it far beyond its specified load limit. They exposed it to mistreatment that would have disabled most other vehicles. The Jeep withstood it all. On soft ground, where vehicles with rear-wheel drive necessitated cautious operation and frequently got stuck, the Jeep simply forged ahead. Its low-range gearing enabled it to crawl over obstructions at a walking pace, a feat the Kübelwagens' transmission could not replicate, even with its reduction hubs. News circulated throughout the Afrika Korps. The Americans possessed a vehicle that surpassed the Wehrmacht's counterpart in nearly every significant aspect. Officers and mechanics from other units arrived to inspect it. The responses followed a consistent sequence: initial doubt, then reluctant admiration, and finally consternation as the full meaning became evident. A supply officer who had been employed in German automotive factories before the war dedicated an afternoon to analyzing the vehicle. His conclusion was direct. This signifies a foundational contrast in our methods. We construct vehicles to attain engineering flawlessness. The Americans construct them to be produced. In a total war, that is what truly counts. He elucidated to the gathered officers and NCOs what this contrast signified. Examine this engine block. It is cast, not machined to precise tolerances. The Americans give up a minor amount of performance in exchange for enormous increases in production velocity. They can instruct a semi-skilled laborer to assemble one of these engines in a small part of the time required to build a German engine. Now, apply that principle to every single component. He gestured toward the stamped metal body panels. These panels are rough in comparison to our vehicles, but they can be manufactured by the thousands in plants that formerly made home appliances. The Americans have mobilized their entire economic structure. Every refrigerator plant, every washing machine factory, every commercial vehicle builder, all have been repurposed for military production. We are incapable of matching this output. The officers became quiet. He had given voice to a suspicion many were starting to harbor. Germany's philosophy, which prioritized quality and precision, was logical in times of peace. But in a total war, the American strategy of satisfactory products delivered swiftly was proving to be overwhelmingly effective. One mechanic devoted that evening to composing a thorough technical analysis. He recorded every feature of the Jeep's design, highlighting both its advantages and its shortcomings. The report traveled up the chain of command, one among thousands of similar papers generated by German technical intelligence services. Comparable reports were inundating Wehrmacht headquarters from all fronts. German mechanics and engineers were encountering American vehicles and equipment with growing regularity, and the evaluations were consistently alarming. The Americans were outproducing Germany by margins that appeared incredible. In late 1942, Wehrmacht intelligence ordered a study on Allied vehicle production. The findings validated their gravest concerns. American factories were manufacturing military vehicles at a rate of thousands each day. Ford's Willow Run plant on its own was finishing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes during its peak output. American shipyards were launching Liberty ships more quickly than Germany could sink them. The data pointed to a sobering reality. America's military vehicle production in 1942 surpassed the combined total output of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and the rate of production was still accelerating. The captured Jeep achieved a kind of fame within its unit. Soldiers vied for the opportunity to drive it. Officers employed it for forward reconnaissance, placing more faith in its reliability than in their own vehicles. When parts became worn, replacements were salvaged from other captured Jeeps with a troubling simplicity. Everything was interchangeable. By early 1943, the Afrika Korps had seized dozens of Jeeps. Wehrmacht mechanics established unofficial networks, exchanging maintenance tips and scavenged parts. A black market developed for captured American vehicles and equipment. A functional Jeep could fetch prices that greatly surpassed its theoretical worth because its superiority in desert warfare was universally acknowledged. Then, on May 13, 1943, the Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia. Roughly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers were taken as prisoners. Their participation in the war was finished, but their lesson in American manufacturing power was only just starting. The disparity between German and American capabilities became undeniable during the transport to captivity. American trucks moved prisoners in numbers that would have necessitated horse-drawn carts in the Wehrmacht. American Liberty ships, which were commonly constructed in 5 to 6 weeks at peak production in 1943, a significant improvement from the initial 8 months, transported thousands of them across the Atlantic. Every element of the logistical effort showcased an organizational strength that far outstripped anything Germany had ever managed. At the prisoner processing facility in Oran, Algeria, captured mechanics observed American motor pool sergeants servicing a fleet of vehicles with a casual adeptness that would have been unattainable in the Wehrmacht. The motor pool housed scores of Jeeps, trucks, and command cars. Young American soldiers, many just past their teenage years, conducted maintenance with speed and self-assurance. Tools were plentiful and easily accessible. Parts were supplied without the delays of requisitioning. Every vehicle shared the same fundamental components which enabled mechanics to service any vehicle without needing specialized training. An American sergeant who had a working knowledge of German noticed a captured mechanic observing, "Are you a mechanic?" "I was with Afrika Korps Vehicle Maintenance." The sergeant smiled. "Well, the war is over for you, but I imagine you have some questions. Come along, I will give you a tour. It is not as if you can pilfer anything now." The experience that followed was an educational afternoon. The sergeant guided him through the motor pool, clarifying American maintenance philosophy with candid honesty. You see, the key is that we design everything so any farm boy can repair it. The majority of our men had never seen a vehicle engine before their basic training, so we keep it simple. Color-coded wires, standard bolts, everything is labeled. We have manuals written at a 6th grade reading level. The concept is that if a part fails, anyone can fix it without needing to call in an expert. The captured mechanic inspected a dismantled Jeep engine. Each component was distinctly marked. The maintenance manual featured detailed diagrams and step-by-step directions that could be followed by someone with very little mechanical expertise. "How many of these do you manufacture?" The sergeant shrugged. "Hell, I do not know the precise figures, but thousands each week, I would imagine. They just keep rolling off the assembly lines faster than we can get them shipped out. We have so many Jeeps that if one breaks down, we typically just take another one instead of repairing it right away. Thousands each week. The figure seemed beyond belief, yet the proof was all around. The motor pool had more vehicles than entire German divisions had owned, and this was merely one small American unit at a forward supply depot. The sergeant continued with the tour. He pointed out Dodge trucks capable of carrying loads that would have demanded 2 German vehicles, half-track personnel carriers produced in such numbers that their German counterparts seemed like collector's items, and tank transporters that could move armor without wearing down their tracks. The thing is, we learned from the last war. We construct everything using common components. A bolt from a Jeep will fit a truck, which will fit a half-track. It is the same with electrical parts, hydraulic systems, everything. It simplifies logistics. Instead of requiring 1,000 different parts, we might need a couple of hundred, and we produce those by the millions. This was the principle that German manufacturing had never quite managed to grasp. Component commonality was not just about the efficiency of production, it was about establishing a logistical ecosystem where any part could be utilized in any place. Any mechanic could service any vehicle, and the entire system was self-reinforcing. The transit from North Africa to American prison camps furthered the education. At each stop, the prisoners observed American production capacity working on a scale that challenged their German preconceptions. The port at Norfolk, Virginia, handled thousands of tons of supplies each day with mechanical proficiency. Cranes loaded and unloaded cargo at a pace that would have demanded entire armies of laborers in Hamburg. Trains transported prisoners across America in passenger cars that would have been considered luxurious in Germany. And vehicles were ubiquitous. Cars crowded the parking lots outside factories. Trucks formed convoys on the highways that extended for miles. Military vehicles sat in depot yards by the thousands, waiting to be sent to combat areas. At Camp Hearne, Texas, skilled mechanics volunteered to work in the motor pool. American camp commanders appreciated their skills because the war effort required every person available. For the subsequent 2 years, German mechanics labored alongside American soldiers, servicing the vehicles that kept the camp operational. American mechanics tackled vehicle maintenance with a direct, practical mindset. They were not engineers pursuing perfection. They were problem solvers dedicated to keeping equipment functional. When something broke, they repaired it swiftly, using whatever was on hand. When parts were not available, they improvised. When a vehicle was beyond repair, they stripped it for components and put in a request for a replacement, which would arrive in days, not weeks. The captured mechanics studied American methods with great interest. German mechanics were taught to maintain vehicles according to factory standards, which called for specialized tools and strict procedures. American mechanics were taught to keep things operational by any means necessary. In peacetime, the German approach yielded superior results. In the turmoil of war, the American approach proved to be far more effective. The motor pool at Camp Hearne handled hundreds of vehicles each month. Jeeps would arrive for routine service, be attended to in hours instead of days, and then be returned to duty. This efficiency was a result of the abundance of parts and the interchangeability of components. When a part required replacement, the parts room had dozens of them in stock. When a tool was needed, the tool room supplied it without delay. When a vehicle was beyond repair, another one simply took its place. One German mechanic formed a friendship with an American soldier who had been employed by Ford before the war. The American was well informed about the automotive industry. Before the war, I worked on the assembly line at Willow Run. That is Ford's bomber factory outside of Detroit, the largest factory in the world. We were building B-24 Liberators. Production began in '42, and by the time I was drafted last year, we were finishing one bomber every hour. Every single hour, a complete 4-engine heavy bomber came off that line. The figures were astounding. 24 bombers a day, over 700 per month. How is that level of production possible? Mass production principles. Mr. Ford discovered how to break down complex manufacturing into simple, repeatable actions. You do not need skilled artisans if each worker performs one simple task over and over. A young man straight from the farm can be trained in a week to install one type of bolt in one specific place. Do that with 1,000 workers, and you achieve massive output. This was the crucial difference. German production depended on skilled craftsmen creating high-quality products in limited numbers. American production depended on semi-skilled workers creating adequate products in vast numbers. The American went on, "It is the same with the Jeeps. Willys Overland makes them, and so does Ford. Both factories use identical specifications. A part from a Willys Jeep fits a Ford Jeep without any issue. They are completely interchangeable. This means if one factory is bombed or encounters problems, the other continues production." Maintenance is simple because every mechanic learns to service one vehicle, not dozens of different versions. The German mechanic reflected on the Wehrmacht's vehicle inventory. Dozens of different truck models from various manufacturers, each with its own unique parts and service needs. Kübelwagens from Volkswagen, command cars from multiple sources, and captured vehicles from all over Europe, each demanding its own set of spare parts and specialized knowledge. German logistics were a chaotic mess of incompatible systems. American logistics were made efficient through uniformity. The true brilliance is that we designed for manufacturability from the very beginning. When they issued the requirements for the Jeep back in '40, they gave the companies just 75 days to deliver a prototype. American Bantam did it in 49 days. Then Willys and Ford improved the design for mass production. Everything had to be simple to manufacture, simple to maintain, and simple to repair. The captured mechanics had inspected enough Jeeps to know this was the truth. The vehicle was not elegant. German engineers would have created something more advanced, but complexity hindered mass production, and mass production was winning the war. By the summer of 1944, the prisoners had heard talk of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. When word of the landing's success came, many were not surprised. The Allies possessed the manufacturing power to construct an invasion fleet that would have taken Germany years to build. News reached the camps through American newspapers and radio. They read reports of the Normandy beaches, where Allied forces had landed with thousands of vehicles in the initial assault alone. Jeeps, trucks, tanks, amphibious vehicles, all transported across the English Channel in purpose-built landing craft, which were themselves manufactured by the thousands. The sheer magnitude of the operation was beyond belief. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men in the first wave. Within weeks, millions of Allied soldiers would be fighting in Europe, all supported by a production base that created equipment faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy it. The German prisoners considered their pre-war certainty of victory. That certainty had been founded on beliefs about German technological superiority. Those beliefs turned out to be flawed. Germany did have superior engineering in many fields. German tanks were more heavily armored and better armed than most of their American counterparts. German aircraft were often more advanced. German small arms were excellent. But none of that was relevant when America could produce 5 tanks for every one Germany built, 10 trucks for every German truck, and 100 Jeeps for every Kübelwagen. In the motor pool one afternoon, prisoners observed American soldiers loading Jeeps onto transport trucks for shipment to the port. A young private drove each Jeep up the loading ramps with an air of casual confidence. Dozens of vehicles were loaded in less than an hour, all destined for Europe to replace losses and supply new units. One German mechanic understood that this single loading operation at one camp in Texas represented more vehicles than his entire division had owned in North Africa. This scene was being replicated at camps and depots all across America every single day. The numbers became undeniable. Germany had put its economy on a total war footing, sacrificing civilian production to bolster military manufacturing. Yet, German military vehicle production in 1943 amounted to less than 100,000 units of all kinds. America, while sustaining a prosperous civilian economy, produced over 2 million military vehicles in the same year. The difference was not merely in quantity, it was also in quality. American vehicles were designed for the realities of war: ease of maintenance, interchangeable parts, simple operation, and rugged reliability. German vehicles were engineered to specifications that were logical in peacetime, but proved to be impractical in prolonged combat. In November of 1944, news arrived at the camp of a German offensive in the Ardennes, which would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's final desperate move in the West. The offensive was heavily dependent on capturing American fuel supplies because Germany no longer had enough fuel to sustain its armored operations. More concerning were the reports of Operation Grief, Otto Skorzény's commando operation that used captured American equipment. German soldiers had been supplied with captured jeeps, American uniforms, and counterfeit identification with the mission of infiltrating Allied lines to sow confusion and seize bridges. If even Skorzeny, Hitler's preferred commando, who had rescued Mussolini, was forced to rely on captured American vehicles because German vehicles were in short supply, it spoke volumes about the Wehrmacht's material situation. The operation was a failure. American military police quickly identified the German infiltrators through careful questioning about American culture and procedures. The Ardennes offensive itself came to a standstill, not mainly due to American resistance, though that was intense, but because German forces depleted their fuel. Panzer divisions left their tanks behind when fuel trucks could not reach them. Infantry divisions had to use horse-drawn transport because their motorized logistics had failed. By January of 1945, the German assault had been contained and pushed back. The spring of 1945 brought news of Germany's downfall. The Red Army was closing in on Berlin from the east. American and British forces had crossed the Rhine and were advancing deep into Germany from the west. In the camp motor pool, German mechanics carried on with their duties, servicing vehicles for the army that had vanquished their homeland. They found no pleasure in their work, but they felt no shame either. Germany had been defeated not because its soldiers were lacking in courage or skill, but because it had challenged powers whose production capacity it could never hope to match. One afternoon in April, an American soldier came to them with an announcement. "Germany has surrendered. The war in Europe is over." The mechanics nodded. They had been anticipating this for months. "What will become of us now?" "You will go home eventually. Probably not right away. There are a lot of logistics to sort out, but you will go home." One mechanic thought about this. Home to a Germany that had been bombed to ruins, occupied by foreign armies, its cities laid waste by the same industrial power that had created the Jeep he had inspected years before. The American asked, "You are a clever man. Did you truly believe Germany could win?" The mechanic considered his response carefully. "Before the war, yes. We were convinced that German quality would prevail over American quantity. We had seen American products before the war, and many were not as good as their German counterparts. We assumed American military equipment would be the same. But it was not. No, when we inspected that first Jeep in '42, we understood that we had made a fundamental miscalculation. We had mistaken peacetime quality for wartime effectiveness. Your Jeep was not better engineered than our Kübelwagen in absolute terms. It was better designed for mass production and field conditions. In a total war, that proved to be the deciding factor." The American nodded. "Yes, we make adequate products quickly and in immense quantities." "Precisely." They stood in silence for a moment, two mechanics from opposing sides brought together by a mutual understanding of what had truly determined the outcome of the war. The process of repatriation commenced in late 1945. German prisoners boarded ships for the voyage home. One mechanic reached Bremen in January of 1946, passing through Allied control points before his release. The city was in ruins, with debris stretching in every direction. But amidst the wreckage, he saw something. American vehicles were everywhere. Jeeps transported Allied officers through the devastated streets. Trucks brought in relief supplies. Motor pools were set up where German civilians worked alongside Allied soldiers. He went to one of these motor pools and introduced himself to the American captain in charge. His English, acquired during his years as a prisoner, was functional. "Sir, I am a former Oberfeldwebel of the Afrika Korps, recently returned from Camp Hearne, Texas. I am a trained vehicle mechanic with experience in maintaining American equipment. Are you hiring civilian workers?" The captain looked at his identification papers. "It says here you worked in our motor pool in Texas. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir, for 2 years." The captain made a note. "We are in desperate need of mechanics. Most German mechanics either perished in the war or are still in prisoner-of-war camps. You can begin tomorrow." Payment is in occupation script, which can be exchanged for rations and essential goods. And so, the former Afrika Korps mechanic found himself working for the army he had once fought against, servicing the very same vehicles he had once studied as enemy hardware. The Allies required mechanics. He required a job. The war was finished. Life went on. In the months that followed, he saw the start of Germany's rebuilding. American aid flowed in, distributed with the same efficiency that had secured victory in the war. Food, medicine, and construction materials, all delivered by American trucks and coordinated by American planners who approached the task of rebuilding Germany in a systematic way. He worked in the motor pool, instructing young Germans in American maintenance methods. Many of his trainees were former Wehrmacht soldiers like him, men who needed civilian skills in a Germany that would no longer possess a military. He imparted to them what he had learned: simplicity over complexity, functionality over perfection, results over theory. These were lessons derived from American vehicles, which were also applicable to the reconstruction of German manufacturing. By 1947, he had been promoted to supervisor of the motor pool's German civilian employees. The American captain who oversaw the facility treated him with respect, appreciating his experience and organizational abilities. One evening, the captain asked him to join him for a drink in his office. "I have been contemplating something. You have worked extensively with both German and American vehicles. If you were to design a vehicle for the new Germany, what would it be like?" He thought about it carefully. "I would adapt the American method for European circumstances. It would be smaller than a Jeep, more fuel efficient, but it would retain the same philosophy: common parts, simple maintenance, and designed for manufacturing rather than for engineering accolades. Europe has narrow roads and scarce fuel, but we need the reliability of American design principles." The captain nodded. "That is intelligent. Marshall Plan funds will rebuild German manufacturing, and German engineers are already examining American methods. The future lies in American-style mass production, modified for local needs." This turned out to be a prescient observation. In the decades that followed, West German manufacturing embraced American production philosophy while preserving German attention to quality. The outcome was an economic revival that transformed Germany from a shattered nation into a global powerhouse. Companies like Volkswagen, which had manufactured the Kübelwagen during the war, grew into international automotive giants by merging German engineering precision with American mass production techniques. The Volkswagen Beetle, which became one of the best-selling cars in history, was the embodiment of this fusion. It was simple, reliable, manufacturable in vast numbers, and affordable for ordinary families. Former Wehrmacht mechanics who had worked in American prisoner of war camp motor pools came back to Germany with knowledge that was incredibly valuable. They understood component standardization. They had observed efficient parts distribution systems. They had seen how simplified maintenance procedures improved vehicle availability. They had noted how designing for manufacturability rather than for perfection made mass production possible. These insights, acquired through years of maintaining American equipment, shaped German automotive design for decades. The German manufacturers that rose from the wreckage did not attempt to replicate pre-war methods. Instead, they combined German precision with American production efficiency. By the early 1950s, this hybrid approach was yielding results. Volkswagen's production increased from thousands of vehicles per year to hundreds of thousands. Mercedes-Benz adopted assembly line methods while upholding its quality standards. BMW redesigned its manufacturing to prioritize component commonality across its different models. The economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s was largely due to these changes. West Germany became a major exporter, selling vehicles worldwide that offered both reliability and affordability. The fusion of German and American methods created products that neither nation's pre-war philosophy could have produced on its own. U.S. Army historian Hugh M. who spoke with Wehrmacht generals after their surrender, recorded their views. Kohl noted that German military leaders admired the Jeep more than any other item in the impressive American arsenal. Not the B-17 bombers, not the Sherman tanks, not the artillery, but the simple Jeep, because it symbolized the manufacturing philosophy that had actually won the war. General George C. Marshall himself described the Jeep as America's most significant contribution to modern warfare. This was not an exaggeration. The Jeep embodied principles that changed not just military logistics, but also post-war global manufacturing, standardization, simplification, design for production, and a focus on reliability over sophistication. By November of 1943, the U.S. Army had gathered enough information on captured Kübelwagens to issue Technical Manual TME 9-803, a comprehensive guide to operating and maintaining the German vehicles. The manual was released on June 6, 1944, D-Day, allowing American forces landing in France to use any Kübelwagen they managed to capture. The Wehrmacht never produced a similar manual for the Jeep, despite capturing thousands of them. They had no need to. The Jeep was so straightforward that any mechanic could understand it. This contrast highlighted the fundamental difference in design philosophy. The Kübelwagen necessitated a detailed manual translated into English for American mechanics to comprehend its complex systems. The Jeep required no manual at all for German mechanics to operate and service it effectively. The reunions started in the 1960s. Former members of the Afrika Korps who had been captured in Tunisia came together to honor their fallen comrades. At one such event in 1967, a spontaneous conversation began about the vehicles of the war. One former mechanic shared his thoughts. The Kübelwagen was better engineered in many ways. It was lighter, more fuel-efficient, and excellent for desert conditions where its air-cooled engine offered advantages. But the Jeep was better designed for modern war. It had four-wheel drive, simpler maintenance, common parts, and most importantly, it could be produced in quantities we could never hope to match. An old officer who had been in charge of a reconnaissance unit nodded in agreement. I remember capturing my first Jeep in '41. We considered it crude compared to our vehicles. It took us months to understand that its simplicity was actually an elegant form of efficiency. By '43, every unit wanted captured Jeeps because they performed better in combat situations. Another veteran chimed in. The most disheartening moment for me was realizing that America was producing more Jeeps in a week than Germany produced Kübelwagens in a year. That was when I knew we were going to lose, not because of any single battle, but because of simple arithmetic. They could replace their losses faster than we could cause them. This was the general agreement that came out of such discussions. German soldiers had immense respect for the Kübelwagen as a vehicle, but they acknowledged that the Jeep, and what it signified about American production capacity, had been the deciding factor, not just through its effectiveness in combat, though it was effective, but through what it revealed about the disparity in manufacturing capability between the warring nations. The Wehrmacht's logistical situation had been precarious throughout the war. By 1943, approximately 80% of German divisions depended on horse-drawn transport. The German Army began World War II with 514,000 horses and would ultimately use 2.75 million horses and mules during the conflict, with about 1.1 million horses in service at any given time. Over 2 million of these animals perished during the war. In contrast, American divisions were entirely motorized. Every American unit used trucks, not horses, for its logistics. This provided operational advantages that Wehrmacht commanders envied. American supply columns could cover hundreds of kilometers in a day. German supply columns, constrained by the walking speed of horses, averaged perhaps 30 kilometers daily under favorable conditions. When Wehrmacht generals analyzed the reasons for their defeat, they consistently attributed it to a material imbalance rather than to tactical or strategic errors. German soldiers fought with skill and bravery. German officers made sound tactical choices. But German industry could not produce enough equipment to maintain operations against adversaries with overwhelming material superiority. The Jeep became the emblem of this disparity because every German soldier who came across one understood what it stood for. Here was a vehicle so plentiful that Americans treated it as disposable, so dependable that it needed minimal maintenance, so simple that any soldier could operate and fix it, and so effective that German units chose to use captured Jeeps over their own vehicles whenever they could. In 1976, the United States Army started to replace the Jeep with the HMMWV. The Jeep had been in service for 35 years, a remarkably long life for any military vehicle. Many continued to be used by reserve units and Allied militaries for several more decades. In that same year, Volkswagen marked the production of the 1 millionth VW Golf. The Golf, like the Beetle before it, was a product of lessons from both German and American approaches. Precision engineering paired with mass production efficiency, the very combination that had rebuilt Germany. By the 1980s, West Germany had grown into one of the world's top economies. German automotive companies exported millions of vehicles each year. German manufacturing became synonymous with quality and reliability, but that quality was now matched with efficient production methods that owed a great deal to American influence. The last Afrika Korps reunion was held in 1998. Fewer than 24 veterans were present, all of them in their 70s or 80s, survivors of a conflict that had concluded more than half a century earlier. During the reunion, someone mentioned that a local museum had recently acquired a restored Willys MB Jeep. Most of them wanted to see it. They gathered around the vehicle, these elderly men who had once been young soldiers in Africa, studying it with the eyes of mechanics and warriors who had learned to respect it. One veteran extended his hand to touch the hood, his arthritic fingers following the familiar contours. "I captured one of these in '42. I used it for 3 months before I was wounded at El Alamein. It was the best vehicle I ever drove, better than anything we had." Another man nodded. "I inspected one in Tunisia just before we surrendered. I could not believe how simple the design was. I realized then that we had been approaching vehicle design completely wrong. Too complex, too hard to produce and maintain." "They made over 600,000 of them," a third veteran added. "We made 50,000 Kübelwagens. That ratio told the whole story." They stood in silence for a moment. The Jeep was there before them, now a museum exhibit, its wartime service long past. But for these veterans, it symbolized more than just a historical object. It was a representation of the production capacity that had defeated them, the functional engineering that had proven its worth, and the abundance that had triumphed over scarcity. "We never had vehicles like this," one of them finally said. "Not in those numbers, not with that reliability, not designed with the same philosophy. We built for perfection. They built for production." This was the lesson that Wehrmacht mechanics had learned while examining captured Jeeps in the deserts of North Africa, in the mountains of Italy, and in the fields of France. It was a lesson that shaped post-war Germany and had an impact on global development. The Jeep had been more than just a vehicle. It had been an education. Wehrmacht mechanics, humbled by defeat, had shown themselves to be excellent learners. They studied not only how to maintain American equipment, but also why that equipment had been designed the way it was, and what those design choices revealed about the manufacturing philosophy that had won the war. That knowledge, though painfully acquired, became the basis for Germany's reconstruction and eventual prosperity. The defeat instilled humility. American equipment taught functional engineering. The combination created a new German philosophy that served the nation far better than its pre-war arrogance. The story of the Wehrmacht mechanics and the Jeep is a story of learning through defeat. Pride had convinced them that German engineering was superior, that quality would triumph over quantity, and that sophistication would overcome simplicity. Reality proved them wrong. American vehicles were not better engineered than their German counterparts in most technical aspects, but they were better designed for the realities of modern warfare. Producible in massive quantities, maintainable by personnel with minimal training, built with common interchangeable parts, and reliable under harsh conditions. This functionality, multiplied by American manufacturing capacity, resulted in an overwhelming material superiority that no amount of German skill or courage could surmount. The Wehrmacht had excellent soldiers, capable officers, and sophisticated equipment, but it lacked the foundation needed to sustain a total war against enemies who could produce equipment faster than Germany could destroy it. The mechanics who serviced both German and American vehicles understood this from direct experience. They had seen both systems in operation. They had worked with vehicles designed according to different philosophies. They knew which approach was more effective in combat conditions. That knowledge guided their work in rebuilding Germany. When they trained young mechanics, they stressed the lessons learned the hard way. When they advised on processes, they argued for standardization and simplification. When they designed new products, they prioritized manufacturability and reliability. The engineers who rebuilt Germany's automotive and machinery industries had studied, captured American equipment, worked in prisoner-of-war camp motor pools, and observed American manufacturing methods. They created a hybrid, German precision combined with American production efficiency. That hybrid proved to be extraordinarily successful. By the 1970s, West Germany had become a leading exporter of manufactured goods. Its economic success was a validation of the lessons learned from defeat. Germany had cast aside the arrogance that had contributed to its downfall and adopted a more effective approach informed by studying the victor's methods. The Jeep played a significant role in that transformation through direct experience. Every Wehrmacht mechanic who maintained a captured Jeep gained insights into the American philosophy. Every officer who rode in a captured Jeep acknowledged its advantages. Every soldier who saw the abundance of Allied vehicles understood what propaganda had tried to hide. These experiences, shared by hundreds of thousands of German soldiers and prisoners, led to a widespread understanding that Germany's defeat was not primarily military, but material. This understanding influenced attitudes toward reconstruction. German leaders and engineers sought to adapt American methods rather than restore pre-war practices that had proven to be insufficient. They embraced mass manufacturing instead of focusing on small-scale craft production. They designed for manufacturability and reliability rather than for perfection, regardless of production challenges. The Wehrmacht mechanics who first encountered Jeeps in the North African deserts could not have foreseen the long-term impact of that encounter. They were attempting to understand an enemy vehicle, evaluate its capabilities, and decide if it could be used by their own forces. In doing so, they uncovered truths about manufacturing capacity and engineering philosophy that would influence the rest of their lives and shape their nation's reconstruction. The last of those mechanics are now gone. Their first-hand accounts are lost, but the lessons they learned are still present in practices around the world. Every vehicle designed for ease of manufacture owes a debt to the philosophy that the Jeep represented. Every standardized part reflects the American influence on global standards. Every emphasis on reliability is a reminder of the lessons from motor pools, where Wehrmacht mechanics serviced captured American equipment. This is the legacy of the Jeep, a teacher of principles that transformed manufacturing. It taught that assumptions about superiority must be questioned, that functional effectiveness is more important than sophisticated design, and that designing for manufacture and maintenance is more beneficial than designing for perfection. Those lessons helped transform Germany from a defeated enemy into a prosperous ally. The mechanics who admitted they had never had vehicles like the Jeep became the architects of renewal. Their humility, born from defeat and educated by observation, served Germany better than the pride that came before the catastrophe. In November of 1942, while examining a captured Jeep in the North African desert, Wehrmacht mechanics embarked on a journey of discovery that would shape a generation. The mechanics who drove captured Jeeps confessed they had never had vehicles like it. That confession was the start of a wisdom that rebuilt a nation.